des allégations de laxisme et d'influence de la part des dirigeants pour rendre des décisions positives.
Je vais vous demander de parler à la ministre.
What happened to the unanimous consent motion on Jimmy Lai? When is it going to be brought before the House?
Unanimous consent motions that deal with complex foreign affairs issues, I think there's pretty broad all-party consensus that there are better fora, better mechanisms available to parliamentarians to deal with those, and we're exploring those. Well, private members' motions, government motions, private members' bills, committee studies.
Does the government support the spirit of what she's trying to do with that motion?
I'll direct you. That's a foreign policy issue for the minister.
Liberal MPs are expressing concerns about Bill C-5. There's a lot of pushback about you ramming it through this quickly. What's your defense?
Can you describe that pushback?
Mayor Smith has raised concerns about it. We were just speaking with Marcus Pulowski, who said this was the best you could do with the time that you have.
And that's a lot. Look, we ran an election campaign on themes associated with getting the country's economy moving, with lowering interprovincial trade barriers, with giving ourselves the tools to build nation-building projects, create jobs. It has broad support across the country from premiers, as you well know, from unions who have been very vocal, from investors in the business community. This bill enjoys incredibly broad support, and we're pleased to be making progress on it.
The bill was to give cabinet broad sweeping powers. Would you be comfortable with a future government, say, led by someone like Pierre Poilievre, these powers?
I'm very comfortable that we require the ability to undertake big projects in this country, and this legislation enables that.
The government looks to give cabinet broad powers on a variety of things, be it this, be it under C2, even to strip people of their immigration status depending on a public interest measure. Are you comfortable giving this kind of power to cabinet regardless of what the future may hold?
You're conflating a number of issues there. We have presented a border security bill that will make its way through the parliamentary process, receive all due examination, and we look forward to that debate.
Was it difficult to get the Conservatives' support on this bill?
You'd have to ask the Conservatives about their decision-making process.
Negotiated with them.
Again, you'd have to ask them about their decision-making process, but I for one, am happy that the government has come forward with this important legislation, and I look forward to seeing it passed.
Why not just ditch the current system, which requires these new powers to go around to fast track these projects? Why not just get rid of the Impact Assessment Act, get rid of these things that you guys are going around potentially to get these projects built?
There has been a lot of discussion of doing just that. A broader, more in-depth reform of our regulatory approval process, and that's something the government will be proceeding with.
Do you think our government's taking the right approach with C5? I think it's really important that the legislation actually does incorporate Section 35 rights and duty to consult in a number of different spaces, including not only the setup of the office, but also each independent project.
Do
I think your government's taking the right approach with C5 in addressing Indigenous concerns?
I think that's a really excellent question, and I think that that's something that's coming out during committee testimony right now. Look, I mean, this is a major issue for us as Canada. We have a commitment to Indigenous peoples. They have constitutional rights. So to just have in C5, a commitment to consult is necessary. Is that sufficient? I think that is a really good question, and I think we're hearing that from Indigenous peoples. We certainly heard it from Chief Woodhouse yesterday, and I think this is something that the committee has to really dig deep into.
Does it have time? Does the committee have time to dig deep into anything at this point?
Well, that's what the committee is doing right now. Look, I'm going to let the committee do their work, but I think it's really important that we're hearing these concerns from Indigenous peoples. Look, there is a clear desire on the part of Canadians to be able to get big projects done in this country. We haven't been able to find the right balance in order to do that over, in a sense, kind of past decades, right? Not even just in recent history, but there is a duty and an obligation to ensure that Indigenous rights holders are part of this process. And so let's see what happens today during the committee process, and I think we'll have more clarity on that later today and tomorrow.
It seems like you have concerns on this bill, though, about this duty to consult. Is it sufficient as it in its current form?
I don't know the answer to that, and so I'm watching and seeing what's happening. I'm listening to the concerns that Indigenous peoples are bringing forward. I think that is something that is an obligation of the federal government to do, and quite frankly, if you don't get that right, you're not able to move big projects forward. That was something that certainly the last government tried to do with C-69. We can argue whether that was successful or not, but we have to get that balance right, because if you don't, you are going to be, the government will be facing court challenges. So in order to do that, they have to hear those voices, and they have to ensure that they are being included in the process. When you do things quickly like this, that makes for challenges. Like the first part of the bill with regards to internal trade, no issues whatsoever. That's something that I think is generally accepted across the country. The second part on Indigenous issues needs to be worked out. That's something that's really important.
This bill, but you're not fast-tracking C4.
I'm not the government House Leader
But
anymore.
you're the chair of the Finance Committee, so I'm just curious about what you think about like a bill that will cut people's taxes, will give them breaks, is not necessarily going to pass the Commons before you guys go home.
Yeah,
but this one will.
That's a great question for the new government House Leader.
Avez-vous des craintes par rapport à ce projet de loi? Comment les conservateurs pourraient, dans un éventuel gouvernement, s'en servir et bien utiliser tous les pouvoirs qu'ils donnent?
Oui, on a écouté mon collègue Nate Erskine-Smith, qui, je ne sais pas comment on dit ça en français, mais
son nom?
No, what he said, that it would make Harper blush, right?
Mon anglais n'est pas assez joli pour ça.
Je ne sais pas comment on dit ça en français, mais c'est quelque chose qui... Les conservateurs n'auront jamais mis quelque chose comme ça en place. Il y a une raison pourquoi je crois que les conservateurs sont si ciblés d'appuyer ce projet de loi. Moi, comme j'ai dit en anglais, le premier parti de ce projet de loi est excellent, comme pour réduire les barrières internes de commerce. Ça, c'est quelque chose qu'on doit faire, qui est extrêmement important. Et la deuxième partie, c'est quelque chose qu'on doit faire aussi, mais on doit voir la manière de le faire dans une manière qui inclut les peuples autochtones, qui est conscient de leurs droits. Et si on ne le fait pas dans une bonne manière, ça ne va pas aider à construire des grands projets. Alors, je vois maintenant le travail qui fait le comité. Je vais voir comment ça déroule pendant les prochaines heures aujourd'hui et on va voir comment ça va demain. Mais j'écoute aussi les craintes des peuples autochtones qui sont très valides et ils ont les doigts dans ce pays.
Vous pourriez voter contre?
Je vais voir comment ça
Vous êtes pas
déroule.
sûr?
Non, mais je suis tout à fait d'accord avec l'intention du projet de loi, mais je veux voir comment ça déroule aujourd'hui et je veux encore écouter des peuples autochtones de comment ils se sentent.
What about splitting the bill like the block wants? Would you support that?
I'm sorry?
How is your government addressing Indigenous concerns on Bill C-5? Do you have any concerns about this bill?
Well, I think that the most important thing is that Indigenous participation in any projects is fundamental, along with meeting climate goals. So those two things are fundamental. So I think it's really a matter of communicating how this will actually work in implementation.
Does it give too much power to Cabinet, though, to decide which laws apply to reviews, to decide which projects go through? It seems like it concentrates so much power in Cabinet in the political office here. Aren't you concerned that that could result in overlooking those things?
I'm pretty confident this is going to be a collaborative process. This is what we were elected to do, to really move forward much more efficiently on assessments to get projects going. It doesn't cut any corners. It really is making everything more efficient and bringing everything into one collaborative assessment process. Get things done, and that's what Canadians elected us for.
Do you think the government's taking the right approach, though, because we have seen protests already from Ontario chiefs, lots of concerns, even threats of resistance this summer, blockades, that sort of thing. What do you think the government should do to address that?
Well, I think we have to talk, we have to have those conversations, and we have to assure that Indigenous participation is included all the way through, and I think that'll be the job ahead of us for the summer, and I'm happy to be a part of those conversations.
Is it a bit too late to do that after the legislation is already passed?
Well, we have a limited time frame. It's important to get the framework in place, the legislation to permit us to do this. So I think it sets us up well for the summer in those conversations.
Do you think idle no more too? Another idle no more?
No, not at all. No. I think we're going to be able to handle this in collaborative conversations. Thank you.
In terms of Bill C-5, going through the House so quickly, and do you share any of the concerns that have been raised by environmentalists and Indigenous groups about it?
I understand their concerns. I'm not sure that I totally agree with their concerns, but I understand them. And yes, I've heard some.
Why don't you can you expand on that? What don't you agree, or what are your thoughts of the bill?
Well, I think as a government, there's a balancing act going on here. I think there's an urgency to get national projects going. I think the public wants that. I think we were elected to do that. And obviously, time is limited over the summer.
But do you think this gives the government way too much power? Like, if this was the Conservatives introducing this bill, would you actually support it?
Well, it isn't a Conservatives' bill. It's our bill. Do I think it gives the government too much power? No, and I think especially at the moment, given the international situation, I think given the pressures from the United States, I think we need a strong Canada. And part of being a strong Canada is getting major projects going, getting access to critical minerals.
But if there's going to be a trade deal with the U.S. in the next 30 days, is this legislation still necessary to move that quickly?
Well, we don't know if there is going to be a trade deal with the United States. And either way, I mean, Trump continues to kind of pressure us and say that he wants us to become the 51st state. And I think we want a strong Canada. Being a strong Canada is having a strong economy. I think part of a strong economy is getting some of these major projects going.
So what are you hearing from your constituents about C5?
I personally have not heard a lot from my constituents, but I certainly hear the voices out there, and I certainly hear the concern from the Indigenous community, and I hear the concerns from the environmentalists.
And what do you say to them? Like, what do you say to these concerns?
Well, we're listening. I mean, there is an urgency to get this done in the short term. We only have, a couple more days of Parliament. Are we going to continue to put this on hold to tinker with it and make slight amendments? I think it's important we pass this legislation, and there's always an opportunity afterwards to amend it.
Does it strike the right balance of taking the time to carefully consider such important legislation if you're going to pass it this quickly? Like, have you struck the right balance on the urgency side here?
Well, given the urgency, maybe this is the best we're going to get under the circumstances, and the fact that we only have a few days to pass the legislation. I mean, is it the optimal balance? Perhaps it's not the optimal balance, but time is of the essence, I think, on this issue, and that's certainly one of the things that the bill is trying to address, the kind of long delays in getting major projects started.
You're like a month, not even, into Parliament, and we're already talking about this is the best we can get?
Well, we are only a month into Parliament, so we didn't have a whole lot of time beforehand to plan it and to get consultation and to get agreement.
Is that enough reason for major legislation to be pushed through like this and to hear the concerns that you're hearing? Like, I'm just trying to understand, you're sort of saying, well, this is the best we can do under the circumstances, but you're in control of the circumstances as the government.
I mean, if we wanted to sit all summer as a Parliament, I guess we could consider that. I guess that was considered, and we decided not to. But there is an urgency given the situation with the United States, given the threat and the ongoing threat, the existing tariffs that currently exist that have created a kind of an economic crisis. Part of our response to the economic crisis is to get these major projects going, to get money out there, to get employment up, to deal with unemployment, and we didn't have a lot of time to do it, and I think the government tried to do its best in terms of striking a balance between competing interests, and Section 35 rights remain. That'll continue to protect the Indigenous people. So am I deeply concerned that this is going to cause irreparable harm to the Indigenous? No, I think probably, and I don't think there is unanimity of opinion within the Indigenous population. There are certainly leaders who want to see development projects going.
The AFM chief, however, said that a bunch of First Nations right now, as you know, are fighting the wildfires right now. They haven't had time to actually study the legislation or even consult about it. So why not take the summer or just split the bill in two to make sure that the major projects part is passed a little bit later after consultation with those First Nations?
Sure, you could, but the urgency remains. I mean, Trump's still talking about wanting us to become the 51st state and making us quote-unquote pay. So I think what Canada needs is to have a strong economy, and this is part of creating a strong economy.
Do you have any thoughts on Canada restoring diplomatic ties with India? Was it the right move?
Yeah, I mean, India is a major trading partner. I think it's certainly our best interest to have good relations with India.
And do you think the Bishnoi gang should be declared a terrorist group? The Bishnoi gang? This is something BC's premier is calling for. Okay.
Thanks very much.
I want to get a bit more of an understanding about what about it you're having issues with. Or
well, I gave a speech on Monday.
I know, but fresh day, new clip.
Do you think
what are your concerns?
Do you think the government's hearing your concerns, or the concerns that has been brought to it about the process of how they're trying to pass this bill?
I hope so, but look, we'll find out. I was just talking with a colleague on the Transport Committee, and they're going to do their work this afternoon, and I'll look at the bill tomorrow morning, and I hope to see amendments, yeah.
What kind of amendments are you hoping to see?
So I mentioned two in my speech that I am very much hoping to see, and it's to make sure that we require the government to consider certain factors. There are factors in the bill, they're good factors. Consideration of environmental protections, climate change, considerations of Indigenous rights. Rather than may consider, the government must consider those factors, I think. And the second piece is to make sure that the government doesn't have this unchecked power to exclude the operation of any law. Where a law is to be repealed, the House should be repealing that law.
So one of your colleagues just suggested that this is the best the government could do with the time they have. If there are other hesitations about ramming this through, are you hoping other Liberal MPs are feeling more emboldened to push back? What do you make of other people expressing reservations within your own party?
Well, it's a funny thing to say it's the best we could do with the time we got, because we could always take a little bit more time. But I would say I gave my speech on Monday, and I'm just gonna wait to see what the committee does. I got a lot of trust in the colleagues on that committee, and hope they improve the bill. And I'll look at the bill tomorrow morning, and I might have more to say.
What does this say to you about how Prime Minister Mark Carney might govern and deal with Parliament and pieces of legislation? This is the first major one we're seeing it move. Do you think this might set a precedent or speak to how he plans to operate the government?
I hope. I mean, when it comes to this particular legislation and the need to move quickly, he promised the Free Trade and Labour Mobility Act by Canada Day, so it's important we move quickly. I think that's relatively non-controversial, frankly. Obviously, standing up the Major Projects Office and getting things moving quickly so we build this country up is important too. The Building Canada Act could provide an important framework for that, and getting it done quickly could prove useful. I do understand that, but I also think we've got to make sure we address any unintended consequences, and so, it would be preferable to me that the committee take more time than one day at this point. But look, the committee is, at least as I understand it, they're going to hear from some of the right witnesses. They've got time to do some clause by clause. It is a short bill. It's an impactful bill, but it's a short bill. And so my hope is that the committee is able to make substantive amendments. But look, we'll see. We'll see.
How many Liberal MPs do you think, would you say approximately, share your views on this bill?
I don't know. I speak for myself, yeah.
Are you concerned this is what legislation is going to look like? This is the process it's going to go through? It's going to be about speed? It's going to be about getting things done?
Not all legislation will operate in this fashion, right? So we saw C2 introduced. C2, I think, was debated yesterday, but or is being debated today. But C2, we're not going to deal with. And I know there's some concerns I've heard from civil liberties organizations, for example, and I share some of those concerns. In another life, I volunteered for the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, and so that bill we're going to take the summer. We're going to come back in the fall. Committee's going to properly study that, and so this is I think a unique bill in that this is a particularly key part of the agenda that the government and the Prime Minister wanted to see through to set the stage for building this country up in a relatively short period of time. I do respect that. I think we should move quickly to get good projects built as fast as possible. But that's not to say we should have unfettered discretion and unchecked power in the government. We've got to make sure there are guardrails. Thanks very much.
Any concerns about C5 being Any concerns for your constituents on C5, the pace the government's taking?
No, I think we're doing what's absolutely necessary. It's an important piece of legislation.
Then what do you make of the concerns from the AFN environmental groups that you're ramming this bill through?
I don't think we're ramming it through. I think we're getting it through done with accelerated speed. It's something we campaigned on. It was part of the platform, and appropriate consultations will take place. I'm not worried about that. People are right to express their concerns, but their concerns will be addressed, and the consultation will take place. I'm really not concerned about it. I think it'll end up going through.
But why is such a major piece of legislation? Like, this is moving faster than the typical parliamentary process.
Well, look, we're here for 4 weeks. We promised to do this in the campaign. It's important to do it. Commitment was to get this done by July 1st. You know what's going on, with our neighbor to the south and around the world. It's important. We need to get it done, and we need to get it done quick, and we promised to do it, and we're fulfilling our promise.
Would you trust the Conservative government with this bill? Were you a Conservative government with this bill?
We're the government right now, and we're making decisions. And I've got to go to caucus, guys. Thanks.
The CC's report says India is one of the top perpetrators of foreign interference, yet we're restoring diplomatic ties with the country. How do we reconcile that?
Look, I think over what's clear is that the investigation with respect to what happened in Surrey continues. The RCMP has an active investigation, and it is important that Canada, as a rule of law country, continue that work. And of course, we've had difficult conversations with the Indian government, and that will continue. There is no way in which a third country can come into Canada and implement its using proxies, be involved in the murder of a Canadian. And we have expressed our concerns over many months, and we will continue to do so. It is an independent investigation that's been undertaken by the RCMP, and I think we need to wait until they complete that work.
Did the Prime Minister bring this up with Modi?
Are you considering declaring the Bishnoi Group a terrorist organization?
I note the comments by Premier Eby asking for the listing of the Lawrence Bishnoi Group as an entity under the terrorist entity under the Criminal Code. As you're aware, this is an independent process that goes through our public security agencies, and upon their recommendation, I will be able to take that decision to Cabinet. We haven't received a formal request by Premier Eby. We look forward to engaging him on a range of issues, including this one.
Do you have assurances from the RCMP that India has stopped its campaign of co-opting and like attacking Canadian citizens on Canadian soil? They were very public about that last October. Now we're reopening our High Commission in India.
It is absolutely clear that as a government, we condemn any interference by foreign actors in Canada. The RCMP, as you're aware, is completing its ongoing investigation, and they will have more to say.
So did the government bring up Nijar too? The Bishnoi Group, your government is considering whether to declare it a terrorist group now? Just to clarify.
Look, the national security apparatus are continuously assessing organizations that we may consider listing as entities under the Criminal Code. This doesn't mean it's an active file right now, but I will say that at all times our security apparatus will assess the threats and whether they meet the legal threshold that's in the Criminal Code for the listing.
Is your government prepared for the protests and pushback on C2, C5?
Concerns from First Nations. Do you think your government is taking the right approach here?
So I've been listening to Indigenous communities for the past week, hearing their feedback, hearing their concerns. I think what's really needed right now is communication, and communication back and forth. What we're hearing from Indigenous leaders is that they just want to be communicated with about this. Because really what we're talking about is future projects. You know, there may be a few, there may be many, but the hypothetical projects. So it's hard to consult on hypothetical projects that might only impact a few. But what we are hearing, and what's within the legislation that we have to be sure of, is that the legislation reaffirms Section 35, Aboriginal Treaty Rights. It's going to be compliant with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and that we're ensuring that the future projects, if amended or anything like that, have to meet the consultation tests set out. And so every part of this moving forward is about communicating with them how this is going to unfold. And we're continuing to listen to them now, continuing to hear from their concerns, and they're going to have some time at committee, and I've been in constant touch with not only my chiefs in Nova Scotia, but also the national chief, and trying to figure out how we can better communicate moving forward.
Do you believe the bill should be split up, pass the internal trade stuff now, and let this sit over the summer?
I think that we got elected on a platform that said we were going to do this by July 1st. I, as a member of Parliament for the Liberal government, as well as 4 other Indigenous people in our caucus, we all campaigned on getting something done by July 1st. Canadians want us to meet the moment. Canadians want us to meet the moment on these, and that's what we're expecting to do. Where I feel the importance is that these big projects are hypothetical. So we're looking at a framework for the projects, not the actual development of it. And we're creating a framework that respects Indigenous rights, respects UNDRIP, and that moves forward in a process over the summer where we engage not only the proponents of this, but we're engaging the Indigenous people. And clearly within the legislation, it sets out what factors have to be considered. Indigenous interests are a part of that, that means meaningful equity, meaningful participation, and meaningful projects in order for these large projects to be successful.
Sorry, but the House is going to vote on this by Friday. What engagement can we still do in 2 days?
I've been talking with chiefs for at least 10 days on this, asking their thoughts since we introduced it. And really what we haven't done properly is communicated what's in the legislation. I know that chiefs tend to be busy with what's going on in their communities. That's why I've asked ministers to proactively reach out to their local leaders and say, here's what's in the legislation. What are your concerns about the actual legislation?
But they're saying that they weren't even consulted before the legislation. Like, you're talking about it needs to be communicated to them now, but a lot of these groups are saying that they weren't even communicated before. And does this show that there's a marked difference in the way that this government is approaching that relationship?
Well, you're looking at the duty to consult legally, and I used to teach this as a professor of Aboriginal treaty rights at Cape Breton University. The duty to consult is triggered when there's a project that's adversely could impact an Indigenous community. Because we're talking about hypothetical projects in a framework right now, what we're doing is saying the framework we're putting the framework forward, but the important part is once we've identified a project where it could impact Indigenous rights, that's when consultation happens, that's when we're going to have the dialogue, and that's when Section 35 Aboriginal and treaty rights come into play. And we're saying all of those things continue to be in the legislation. I just think that the communication hasn't happened where they're probably reflecting the clauses in this, and that this is not about this Bill C5 is about developing a framework for the projects, not about developing the projects right now.
So groups that should not have been consulted about this legislation before?
I don't know anything about the cabinet powers. I'm reading the legislation as most folks are and saying that this is what's in the legislation, but what's clear in the legislation is that in order for you to move forward on these legislative pieces, that you actually have to not only advance Indigenous interests, but also look at our climate targets on that. And I think those are some of the main concerns that I've heard from my Indigenous stakeholders.
Does this hurt the government's relationship with Indigenous communities?
Sorry?
Does this hurt the government's relationship with Indigenous communities?
I think this is turbulence on a flight, that once we land the plane, we're going to be able to have the conversations. We're going to do the work over the summer. I'm confident that we're going to do the work over the summer to engage, talk about how do we move forward on this while still ensuring that we meet what the Prime Minister has said is having this done by July 1st.
Ontario First Nations say they don't trust the government to consult properly, and they're planning resistance this summer. We could see blockades and that sort of thing. Are you worried about an idle no more too?
I'm always concerned when Indigenous communities don't feel that they're being heard. We know that the provincial legislation came through before our legislation came through. They are both called Bill C5s. So there is a lot of confusion right now in our communities that have been hearing about Ontario's Bill 5, and I've been asked even before we introduce any legislation, what's your stance on this, on Bill 5? And because there were so many people against the provincial one, we saw that translate to a lot of distrust over the federal one. And I've had to call people many times and say they're two separate legislations. But what we're hoping to be able to do is come from this meeting, come from this week, and saying, yes, we move this fast, but we're planning to move forward, communicating with you fully over the next few weeks and months, and ensuring that your participants, meaningful partners in this. And that's it.
Do you plan to sit down with Ontario chiefs? Does your government plan to do that?
I don't know if our government is going to do that. I always am open to meeting with any of the chiefs, regional chiefs. I've talked to regional chiefs from across the country, friends in Ontario. I know the concerns, but what I'm really trying to do is keep the dialogue open, keep the lines of communication open, and really find ways to communicate properly what we're doing here with this legislation. Thank you very much.
evacuations. Ambassador Huckabee in Jerusalem is talking about getting Americans out of Israel on cruise ships, on aircraft, I presume to Cyprus, to Athens, places like that. What do you think? Is external foreign affairs doing anything like that?
So, Foreign Affairs, our department has constant contingency plans for every possibility. So right now, all our officials are always looking at every option. What is safety and security is our number one issue. So there are many lines of work that Global Affairs has. The number one issue is the safety and security of Canadians abroad. That is on their agenda. So they'll be looking at the safest and best ways for those Canadians who want to return home to come home. It's a little early now to say what other countries are doing. We will be in constant contact. We have already been in constant touch with all our allies, and there will be concerted efforts, and we will be working together.
Sorry, are there plans for an evacuation of Canadians?
There are always contingency plans for any possible problem in any country. Every mission around the world has a plan for what happens whether you've got a natural disaster or a war or a civil unrest. We have plans, so there are always plans.
Could Americans help evacuate Canadians?
We've helped Americans. I would hope they would help us whenever we have that. We work with all our, particularly our NATO allies, but also our Commonwealth allies and allies around the world in many, many ways. So we have, just as we did during the COVID evacuation, we will always work with other countries, and they have certain skills, we have certain skills, and we'll work together.
And how many Canadians right now are in Israel that could...
I don't have an exact number. I believe it's in the low thousands.